Yes, we're moving from looking at the world, cities, towns, down to the anatomy of forks. Interestingly, most people in here have cut a tree down. Yeah? Or ordered a tree to be cut down by someone else. Only last year, I had a beech tree, lovely old couple in the beech tree, and a consultant came along and said, oh, that mushroom at the bottom, it's Myerscough. That tree's got to come down. And quoted a price of £600, and then after a couple of days, that went to £2,000. And the guy had the wit to Google the image of the fungus, and then he rang me. Was it Myerscough? No. No, it was a funnel cap. It was a clitocybe. We've all got the responsibility and the power to condemn trees or to look after them. You would be considered the expert, wouldn't you? Okay. So we are going to look at something a bit niche. We're going to look at, where's my pointer to click on? Thank you. But if you follow certain rules, particularly non-scientifically backed rules, you may be doing the wrong thing with trees. If you think a beech tree with a funnel cap somewhere near it needs cutting down, you are going to destroy a lot of beech trees for no reason. So that's the sort of context. Okay. So a little summary, very briefly about modelling branch attachment, which I did my PhD in, and then introducing you to axillary wood, and then very briefly mentioning progress on natural bracing, and then, well, there's two rules. A big bulge around the bark inclusion. As that bulge gets bigger, is it more and more dangerous? And a fork in the tree, is a fork in the tree a defect in a tree? We need to prune to eliminate all the forks. So if those are true, then we've got to manage those trees, haven't we? I don't know, I do quite a bit on LinkedIn at the moment. It actually started by just being connected to ex-students, and then I've been using it subtly to train students. I've been doing this thing where trees change over time. A few people caught that? Okay, so they're just going back on pictures of trees. Oh, I could take another picture of a tree. And here is a branch attachment in an oak tree, and we can see the knot there. And then 11 years later, because it's quite a young oak tree, the knot's now there, and we've got all this occlusion of the branch. So these trees over time images will appear on some of the slides because I find them very useful as sort of backup evidence that these things happen. So obviously that's forming a knot by this trunk growing and occluding the base of this branch. It's been forming a knot. Okay. And so this is a recent drawing going into a review paper about branch attachment modelling, contrasting a codominant connection to a branch stem connection. But really, it's as people who have been to my workshops know, it's a continuity between these two. And as this diameter ratio changes, this becomes more likely to be occluded by the faster growing stem. So here, features that they share, the pith, bifurcating into two piths, okay, and this axillary wood, AW here, this twisted dense wood. Who's going to verify for me? Jeremy, are you busy? A little twisted bit of wood there, okay. The axillary wood there, or here, Luke, some axillary wood. Can you see this twisted wood? Yeah. There's also a branch. We're going to pass these a little bit. Very fortunately, on the outside of the tree, especially when you've got a smooth bark tree, it gives you a lot of information. Let me just put that one up, about where the auxiliary wood is, because it's the branch bark ridge on the outside if that's well expressed. Okay. But we can see the difference between these two junctions is that for mechanical strength, the codominant is pretty much highly reliable on a good production of auxiliary wood, where if you look at the branch into the stem, this cone here, from here to here, represents the knot. So it's got some anchorage into the stem by being occluded by the faster growing stem. Therefore, you tend to get, for codominant, much greater production of auxiliary wood than you do on a branch stem attachment, because you're starting to get a knot forming. Okay, and the reason I introduced auxiliary wood is natural bracing tends to de-incentivize the production of the axillary wood, tends to weaken. If there's very weakened, we're going to get bark inside. So exactly the same position we have this axillary wood, you would just have a sheet of bark, a bark inclusion. Most people have seen a bark inclusion fail out of a tree. The bark included, yeah, most people have seen that. It's a very kind of common type of failure. So a bit of axillary wood. Just thought there's just too many people to pass samples, but I've brought a couple of samples. Where's Ted? So if we look closely, some twisted material in that Quercus roba. Taking out cats still. Okay. So some of you might be aware that in scientific circles, some woods are separated out as reaction woods. Compression wood, tension wood, flexure wood. And they have certain properties that mean they're not normal wood, if you like. Auxiliary wood, the wood formed in the axil of a branch, it seems to be another reaction wood. Okay? If you think auxiliary wood was an axil, in between the junctions, the normal English translation for a human body, we had this before, haven't we? Armpit. It's armpit wood. Okay, that we're looking at. You can tell that to your children when you get home, I'm sure they'll be interested. They won't be interested in auxiliary wood. Anyway, it's formed in the axil of the branches. Now, what you need to do is just check, these are common characteristics of reaction woods, that they're formed to a particular strain scenario acting on the tree. They have specialized anatomical difference to normal wood. They're normally unstable when they dry out, so if anyone's bought a plank from B&Q and it's a bit warped, there's probably some reaction wood in it. And they're part of the posture control system of a tree. So it's how it poses its branches and its stems. So when we look at auxiliary wood, is it very specific straining scenarios that it produces that? Yes, it is. Has it got a specialized anatomy? Yeah, we x-rayed that. It's very different from normal wood. Is it unstable when dry? Check. That's just me finding that funny. Check this little crack in the wood when it's and part of the posture control system of the tree. Well, here's some evidence. So one of the interesting things, when I first found natural bracing associated with bark inclusions, I thought, well, I must set up an experiment making bark inclusions. It is the dark side of my research. I'm the first person to have deliberately gone out into the woods and made bark inclusions. So in the first year, I set up 25. This is aspen. I set up 25. You can see what I've done. Just spiraled around some horticultural wire, kept that static. In the 3 years, 17 of the 25 have become bark inclusions. So that was important to sort of reinforce the natural bracing work where I found them associated with it. So you can see, if it's not being flexed, if it's not being moved, auxiliary wood is not forming to a great degree. Okay, so that's one part being a reaction wood. Okay, has it got specialized anatomy? Well, these are separated fibers in a little bit of wood inside an axil of a branch junction. And we can see, don't they look like swimming tadpoles? Okay, when we separate the separate fibers, they're doing all sorts of zigzagging, circling, and twisting patterns that are often very restricted and shortened. And essentially, the cellulose inside them is not spiraling in a normal way, but it can't in this snaking pattern. So it fits with reaction wood in that sense. It's very different from compression wood and tension wood because of the twisting. But the easiest, anyone seen that Halifax commercial with the slinky? Yeah, okay. Just think about the wood fibers are doing this sort of jive like this, twisting like this. There's no way that the individual spiraling in the slinky is staying straight. It's all curving around as well. Okay, so that's part of what I found with that anatomy of auxiliary wood. The important part of it is to create this interlocking pattern. Let's look at another thought here. So deep under this branch bark ridge is this twisted dent zone. Anyone that's split wood is very familiar with this twisted dent zone that's helping to make this pattern happen. This pattern only happens if the junction is loaded sufficiently, which links to Luke's presentation considerably. Okay. And here we can just look, because I can't pass samples, there's the auxiliary wood in this junction where the pith bifurcates into two. But this one is actually accidentally a twig has got occluded in. And this is what a bark inclusion looks like. Okay? So that's where the auxiliary wood should be formed, but now it's in bark inclusion. Obviously, if you're thinking bark inclusions are weak. Sometimes you find old dead oak trees, old dead elms, and you can look in the junctions and you can see this is an area which, particularly when it dries out, starts splitting apart. It's quite interesting. Also, if you ask turners, do they use the wood from the junctions? Well, no, it's fairly unstable sometimes. Nice features, but it's sometimes not that stable. And is auxiliary wood part of posture control? Well, trees over time here, this is helping a little bit there. This is a little junction in a variegated sycamore. And this is it 10 years later. It's not your imagination that this branch has changed angle. It has been pushed by the auxiliary wood to change angle slightly. It's not much of a change of angle. People are unaware that reaction woods are posture control. There's some really nice work by French scientists showing that's what they do. Okay, I've a trees over time image. Most of you will come across my work with natural bracing in trees and its association with bark inclusions. Maybe you haven't thought that I've actually shown that you can make bark inclusions. Okay, but I'm quite enjoying going back to these forks, so I took that picture quite a long time, 11 years ago, nearly 12 years ago now, and that's a Tilia cordata. And then we can see it's still a bark inclusion. Why hasn't it responded? Why hasn't it done anything? But when we look to the side, it's got 3 natural braces going across the junction there. Okay, and I tend to use this image because it's quite extreme. So this is a wild cherry, and this has loads and loads of auxiliary wood under the branch bark ridge here, and none, just a long bark inclusion there. Okay, what could have possibly caused that? But this limb is totally free to move, and this is touching here and touching there, so it's not free to move. So the lack of stimulation is leading to these very contrasting strengths of junctions. Okay, and some people will have met me, and I probably emphasize the importance of this diagram to understand natural bracing. That if a natural brace gets set up, prevents movement, particularly to vertically aligned junctions, so we're not getting any gravitational loading across them either, then we're likely to get a bark inclusion because of lack of stimulation of growth of the auxiliary wood. And then either that dies out or gets pruned out, or we'll start a process of bulging. Okay, compensatory growth around the junction, and then it may survive to the point where it's compensated. Oh, it's got balance loop. Back again, balance. Okay. Important part of that is, for this presentation, is what do those bulges mean? Wasn't there an old rule that the bulges meant that as they got bigger and bigger, that junction was going to explode and fail? Because that logical sequence led to the tree persisting, I've also included one where the tree hasn't persisted. So obviously, as it gets released from its natural braces, it's taking the risk of failing. It's more likely to fail because you've just opened up a bark inclusion to loading and movement. Okay. So some recent work we've done, 2 papers have been accepted or come out. I worked with Ruth Totill. We assessed Norway maple and a cultivar of lime, looking at the natural braces. Can we see someone's pruned out that natural brace up here? Okay, associated with this. And we found differences in the population of the Norway maple and the lime. The lime, the natural braces were persisting for a lot longer. The Norway maple, as well as the pruning, the Norway maple was shading out internally its own natural braces, which has been part of what I put in the book in 2016 anyway. If anyone wants to see the book, I've got a copy somewhere. I've forgotten it. It's in my bag. And also working with Dean Meadows, we did some work taking hawthorn samples and testing them with or without natural bracing. Okay, so this is just a simple force displacement diagram, but if you're not used to looking at those, it might look a little bit confusing. So here's us just breaking a normal branch junction. So there's an elastic phase, then it starts yielding, then it breaks. So this is how far it's going. This is the sort of stress level where it's breaking at. And this is when if you bend a junction, but actually it fails at the branch. Often the branch has to yield a lot in compression before it breaks. Okay, but when you put in the natural braces, where we left the natural braces in, we got a very different response, because all the ones we chose with natural braces were bark inclusions, so they should have been weak. Okay, when we left in a minor rubbing branch, okay, you can see that it actually required, much like getting over a hurdle, it required a bit more stress earlier on, and once the rubbing branch flipped off, so it had a natural brace like this, and when we tested it, it came out of contact with the other branch and then it failed rather easily. But this one here had two entwining limbs, and essentially it just kept on giving mechanical resistance to breaking apart for a long, long period of time. It's nice to evidence the natural bracings. They're not just there, you can see them visually assess that they're associated with the bark inclusion, but you can actually gauge what level of strength they're giving to that junction. Okay, and if you're unaware, natural bracing is really common. I've just reached just over 2,000 images of trees with natural bracing. It was raining this morning, but I managed to get 10 at the University of Exeter record. It's a bit addictive finding trees with natural braces in there. Anyone else got that addiction? Yeah, okay, a few. Yeah, that's not just me then. I'm starting to, because I've got so many normal ones, fusion and entwining and touching, I'm starting to get really more interested in this stuff where it's lost. So by the natural processes of branch shedding and shading out, things are getting lost, but you still sometimes get the evidence that it was naturally braced previously. So lots of things like that. And the reason I've done all this is, and the reason I've gone around the world spreading this, is that it's really easy to just follow an old rule of prune out something that's touching, prune out something that's rubbing, and you open up a bark inclusion to potential failure. So this is utility line work on a beech tree. Yeah, it was naturally braced. Obviously, they've zipped off all these branches here, but have they made the power line safer by doing that work? Or have they made it more likely for half the tree to fail into the power line? I'll leave that for you to decide. That's why I'm educating these people. Okay, right, so this is more the new bits of research, although I've touched on a little bit on here. This is really interesting because I've got more than 40 forks I've been following over time. Here we've got a bulge. Can we see this sort of lighter color that suggests it's under strain? And then 11 years later, if you follow the marks, it's actually grown about this much up here, about 200 mil upwards. Maybe some of these people don't realize that, where we've got the vascular cambium is putting growth out. But of course, vascular cambium goes into the axil, and therefore it grows up. It's one of the only parts of the tree where you can write your name, and it will become meters higher if the tree gets really large. But you write it on the trunk of the tree, it will stay at the same level. Okay, so there's the big question. There's a bulge with a sort of obvious sign of strain. This is Lancashire, everything gets covered in algae, but there's what seems like a bigger bulge. Is that getting weaker, or is that getting stronger? Okay, so you know where this comes from. It used to be called Starsey's ears, or elephant's ears, or elf's ears. Often now people just call it big ears. Okay, this is actually one with one large ear, not really on the other side. So I thought, and a random effort to get some audience participation here, I thought I'd show you some bark inclusion failures. And if you see two large ears, I want you to shout big ears. And only the people that won the casket of beer last night are going to shout that out, but I'm going to try. Okay? You ready for this? Okay? I suppose the thing to emphasize about this is something where, go back to the Myerscough beech tree that wasn't a Myerscough beech tree, have we been cutting down tens of thousands of trees, or bracing them, or pruning them heavily, on the basis of an opinion without any data? Yes. We have, haven't we? Thank you. Right, you've got to shout out big ears. Has that got big ears? No one shouted. Big ears? Big ears. Big ears. Yes, attention. Big ears. These are all, I collected a photo album of 110 bark inclusion failures. Yeah, it is. Okay, so part of the paper I've just put together and submitted is looking at my photo collection, randomly collected, of bark inclusion failures, but with no bias. Every time I saw a bark inclusion failure, I photo recorded it. As the bulges are getting bigger and bigger, we're getting less failures. It's difficult, it's more complicated than that, because it takes time for the bulge to develop. But if it's getting worse and worse as the bulges get bigger, this diagram needs to look different. Look how many are failing with almost no bulging at all. The majority. Okay. This is logical. Think about it. If the trunk of a tree adds some wood to the diameter of the trunk of the tree, it grows, it's going to be stronger in bending, isn't it? If a branch grows a bit more, it's going to be harder to bend it, isn't it? Why would the junction be opposite? That you added wood to the junction and it's weaker. This odd idea. Okay. To add to that, I did some modelling using, well, fairly sizable, about this sort of size, junctions in hazel, some a little bit smaller, with bulges, without bulges. So I had a control group, a group which turned out to have little bits of bark inside that I didn't know about because they were hidden, tiny little bits of bark. Cup unions, if anyone doesn't know what cup unions looks like, who hasn't? I know Sharon, I'm just looking for people I know. That's a cup union, isn't it? So that'll hold a bit of water. And then these ones with much wider areas of bark. And essentially, within those groups, did the bulges tell you anything about the strength of those junctions? And the statistics says, no, it didn't say anything. You couldn't have predicted the strength from the extent of the bulge. Well, if it was bulged over about 10%, there was definitely bark inside. That's useful. But if you think about it logically, what is it bulging around? Has it been spending 50 years bulging around a minor defect? Okay? Or has it only just started bulging around a major defect? Obviously, that would have a big bearing on the strength, wouldn't it? Okay, so you just can't apply such a simple rule. Trees are much more complicated. It'd probably take me a decade to kill this eye. The number of tree surgeons I've met say, oh yeah, that tree, it's got big ears, we've got to fell it. You know, the number of people that believe this without any evidence is astronomical. So it'll probably take me a decade to kill it off. But to help kill it off, look at the ISA guidance from the latest publication on tree risk assessment. The presence of response growth at a bark-included union indicates the union is under strain. If there was enough response growth, the likelihood of failure may be reduced. So I can conclude from that essentially the trees in America are very different from the ones in Europe. When they bulge around the junction, they're probably getting stronger. But here, I'll leave you to think about that. I do think we're going to need to separate. This is a bulging around a crack, hence my knife can get into it. Can you see that's quite heightened in colour? There's a lot of strain there. You're definitely going to have to differentiate. This junction is cracked, and then the tree's trying to respond lower down. It can only respond lower down because that's where the vascular cambium senses the strain at the bottom and the tip of the crack. This is a tree that I've known for, I'm trying to work out, like 19 to 21 years. It's always looked like that. There's quite a pronounced ear, if you like, or a bulge. I prefer to call it a bulge. It's always looked like that. There's no sign of a crack. It's all integral. Okay? It may have been like that for 40, 50 years. You know the worst thing that can happen to that tree? An arborist turn up and say, oh, big ears, and cut it down on no evidence. What's inside that? How weak is that? Is an important question. Okay. And then, having given talks around the world, I'm worried about this other trend where some people feel we need to prune trees to eliminate every fork from a tree, it seems. This is, in case you've forgotten that forks grow upwards, in a birch, the three little marks. There's the apex of the fork, but after 8 years, the apex has risen to here. It's actually not growing very well because you can see it's in a bit of an urban environment there. Okay, so I've used this image a lot on an ash tree. That's still around. It's got a little bit of ash dieback now, I'm afraid. But I marked up 48 forks in this ash tree. If we're going to claim that a codominant like this is a defect, then we need to brace all these junctions. So this tree, to make it safe, needs 48 braces. I mean, problematic idea. Okay, I think anyone that proposes that needs to stand next to this sort of 90, 100-year-old sycamore, look at this fork and wait for it to fail. Okay? Because if it's produced nice axillary wood, okay, it's produced an effective shape, okay, then it probably hasn't got a high probability of failure. I've got some evidence for that. You're thinking, oh, that's just an opinion. I've got some evidence for that because I'm very worried about how this is spreading around the world, that forks are a problem. I'm very concerned about it. So one of the things I've been gathering is pictures of failure, but not at the fork. So it's not uncommon for them to fail away from a junction. Okay, it's just people don't report that. Okay, that's a big failure, got away from the junction. The axillary wood was stronger than the branch, so that survived, that didn't survive. Okay, so there's a lot of that when you look. I also, when I ran my first 11 workshops around the country, I did ask 348, which is roughly the number of people in this hall, what they thought about branch junctions, hidden in the question about what they've seen failing. I mean, obviously, I've seen branch junctions failing. This is a picture of an oak junction that failed at, near Bolton. And what these 348 delegates, mostly from the UK, said, what they'd frequently seen fail are branches and bark-included junctions. Normal junctions, look at that. Just not really seeing a lot of that. Okay. From my database, it seems to be quite species-specific. Nearly all of my fork failures are either salix, willows, or quercus, oaks. There's a little bit of other things, but mostly it's those two genera. So I don't think it's equal across species either. That would be a silly rule. A little bit of data from, it came up before, didn't it? The Typhoon Mangkhut in Hong Kong. I have MSc students over there. One MSc student basically surveyed 1,000 storm-damaged trees. And it matches very much what the 348 delegates said here, even though they're different types of trees, subtropical, tropical trees. That branches. Branches are the most likely thing to fail in a storm like this. Okay, root plates, particularly where they were restricted, lots of stem snappage. We're actually writing the paper more about storm survival strategies. So the trees that shed the little twigs and the leaves, they suffered a lot less mechanical damage. It's called crown shedding or graduated tree failure. You might have come across this idea. And then the branch junctions, well, yeah, 10% of the failures were branch junctions, but nearly 5% of those were bark inclusions. The other 5% are epicormic branches. Remember, they're tropical, subtropical trees, so they're still quite large, fast-growing branches. 0.5% were normal branch junctions. So if you were pruning these trees to eliminate all the forks, to make them safe, you would be dealing with 5 of the 1,000 failures. Okay? It's very obvious what's causing the failures. It's the branches. So what you need to do is take all the branches off. This also links with Luke's presentation, because I saw that this is very much a Preston thing. And now you see the trees become unsafe because the branches are growing back. Actually, this is really good. It's nice to be back in the UK, because we do irony well, I think. Yes, some really struggle sometimes. Right, as long as you knew that was ironic. Right, okay. So we've actually done, I'm only part of the way through this experiment, but it's looking very good, so I will share it, is some of this data about the codominants being weak comes from papers where they've essentially pulled them here in a machine. Okay. Are they loaded like that in reality? This is actually about a 4-meter long branch. Okay. So all we simply did was we loaded it at 100 mil, 200 mil, 400 mil, 800 mil, the same sort of size junctions. As soon as you started getting 400 mil, some of the branches started breaking rather than the junction. You get 800 mil, the majority are breaking in the branches because you're allowing the branches to flex. Given that is like 4 or 5 meters long, the fork is normally, if it's well produced, not a bark inclusion, is normally adequate for its task. Again, linking very strongly to Luke's there. It's in balance with the branches it's holding up. Okay? I've got some exceptions, as I say. It seems there's something definitely going on a bit different with salix and with quercus. Maybe quercus wants to shed a branch or two, give us a bit of a warning. And those weird platanus clones that we used to plant that break at the forks. I've got some evidence for that. So that suggests that, again, the big bulges doesn't look like a good rule that you can apply across whole populations of trees. We actually need to know what's inside the bulge. The idea of forks are weak doesn't seem to matter. I mean, who's seen a normal fork in like a yew tree or a Acer pseudoplatanus fail? Anyone got evidence, a photo of a normal junction in a sycamore? Whereas I can evidence like 20 failures in an oak. I don't think it's very general. I think it's quite species specific. Okay. So, I would just emphasize, from what my work has been like for the last 4 years is the primary cause of bark inclusions in the trees that we manage here is mostly by natural bracing. We can formatively prune the trees. It won't improve their health. It might improve their structure to prevent natural bracing, and therefore we could prevent some bark inclusions. So, knowledge is power. Let's go in orange, yeah. And then from that, the other way round, if you've got an old tree, a mature tree, you've got a bark inclusion in it, always look above. Is it naturally braced? Could really change your assessment of the tree. It all shows that bark inclusions don't inevitably fail. Well, I showed you some trees over time with bark inclusions that are just growing, aren't they? They're not splitting apart, as a general rule. And then, I am desperate to get natural bracing into some pruning guidelines. The race is on, if you like. The first tree pruning book actually mentions natural braces. That would be very useful to arborists. I think I've got it into a standard in Belgium. That's the classic comic country in the English language. I thought I'd get a laugh at that one, but it really needs to go around other countries other than Belgium, because we're not going to have so much to do with them in a little while. Okay. The big bulges around a junction do very reliably show there's a defect inside. I mean, it could be decay, not bark, but very often it's bark inside. But the big bulges of themselves don't say about the strength. In some ways, the bias is the other way. If that bulge has been there quite some time, it's been strengthening itself. Okay? And then ultimately, this is the thing that I worry the most. If you consider a normal codominant in a tree to be a defect, I mean, it's carte blanche to condemn pretty much most trees. Somewhere they will have some sort of codominant in. Go and have a look at Zelkova or an elm or a horse chestnut. Just go and look at some trees. You'd realize that they've got 30, 50 forks in them, and you're saying all those are defective. It's very much like where I started. If you think every fungus is myrripolis, all you need is the chainsaw and a big bank account. But if arboriculture is about that, it's not really getting the care of trees right, is it? So fortunately, this work is showing, well, that's not really likely to be a good rule for all trees at all. Okay, most forks are perfectly adequate for their holding up the structure of the trees. Okay, and I have asked to put that together into a AA guidance note. In particular, the emphasis on the AA guidance note is to get a common language about junctions. Because you might have noticed, there's a lot of layers to this presentation that you will get later. I deliberately used the word union, codominant, fork, junction, because everyone talks different terms for the same thing. So I'd like to write a guidance note so that we're all at least on the same point of description about junctions. So we've got about letters and numbers to code junctions and to code like natural braces or different various features of junctions, so that I can say, who else do I know? Is Dean in here? Someone else I know. You're over there. Oh, you are over there. You're just right at the back. Dean, I can just say, this junction's an A33, and you know what I mean. Yeah, exactly. That's the idea, is that you can communicate that fully. That's the aim of that guidance note. But of course, it will have to incorporate natural bracing. It'll have to incorporate an assessment of a branch-bark ridge, whether that axillary wood has formed nicely or poorly. Okay, thanks very much. I've run out of time. Thanks very much.